Hello folks, today we're going to talk about placing images and working with layers within Adobe Illustrator. So here we are, we have a document here, we have open to a page. The layers panel right here is a very effective way of managing multiple parts of an illustration. You can start thinking about the different parts of an illustration. You might want to consider, like, you have a subject, but you also have a background. Sometimes we may have photos involved. In this case, we're going to use a photo, and we're going to actually learn how to trace with it as well. And then you have the work layer for the illustration. And I like to separate the text from the illustrations and the photos, so that way I can have separation between various elements and just have them kind of grouped together. And then you simply add a layer just by pushing the button, and then it comes in here. If you notice, there's a corresponding color right here next to each layer, and that will actually reflect itself when you select images or various objects on a page. It knows where the image, or what layer the image is from, so the highlighted box will change colors accordingly. So in this case, I have all the layers set up. And I'll show you some of the other features in a moment, but we're going to bring in a photo, so I just kind of highlight that layer to ensure that I'm working in that layer. You can also lock the other layers in order to isolate the layer that you're working on, so you don't adjust anything inadvertently. And in this case, I want to bring a photo in here. We go over here to File, Place, and you can search your computer hard drive and for a file that you want to place in here. In this case, I have this airplane image, which we're going to bring in and kind of work with. I generally recommend to say link an image rather than embed an image. Embedding an image ultimately increases the file size for the work file, which ultimately in the long run can actually make your computer run a little slower, because your computers, the more memory that you use for files, or for files, the larger the files, the more memory it takes to operate that within that file. So I like to link it because in this case, especially for a lot of this type of work, you don't need to actually have the file fully embedded into the document. It's just there for a reference. In this case, we're just going to trace over it. So the linking process works is that it will show the image, but if it ever goes to print, and you need the high resolution file for the print, the document will basically call up the high resolution file and print it directly from the file instead of from the photo file instead of from the Illustrator file. Makes it a little bit more efficient for overall daily use. So we're just going to link it, and we're going to place it. And it asks you where to place it, so you get this little icon with a little picture on it. You have one images to place. Sometimes you can select 10 images in a folder, and then basically drag and drop each one. I'm going to drop it right here. As always, this image is a very large image, and when you place an image within the file, it will come in at the 100% original size of the image. So in this case, this is 34.6 inches high by 58, almost 5 feet in width. It's much bigger than we actually need, so we can actually kind of scroll that down. And the key thing is when you're scaling something down, is that you keep it in proportion, because otherwise, if you do this, it takes the biplane out of proportion. It kind of distorts the view. This is a big thing that you want to make sure that the proportions are accurate and 100%. Just because it distorts the view of even people, and then that's something that you don't want to misrepresent folks in their appearances. So easiest way to keep that in proportion is just to hold down the Shift key, like that. So I already have the image in place here. I have it on again the photo layer. I'm going to step over here. Well, actually, I'll just stay over here then. Kind of show you what we come up to. So in this case, I can trace over it, and a lot of times I would just lock that layer so I can't touch it or I can't move or anything on it. And I will unlock the illustration layer and start and begin to kind of trace this item with the pen tool. There are multiple ways to trace this, but I find the pen tool most effective because illustration is creating a version of reality. So in this case, you can't write on this layer sign comes up. It's because I have the photo layer selected. If I select the illustration layer, then I have the ability to start drawing with that pen. And I'm just going to kind of loosely trace this airplane wing over here. And again, sometimes it really helps in getting up close, so you can see the line detail. And I'm just going to kind of do a chop job in tracing this. I'm filling it up with white as I go along with the black stroke. If you look over here, just to make sure that what you're filling, you can change this to no stroke if you want in the future, so that way you can you can see the lines more clearly, so the fill doesn't get in the way. I'll round that curve out later, and I'll put one over here to round the curve here. There we go. So now I have the wing kind of built, one wing. And ultimately, you can round out the corners like we do with the controls, like that. And then what you're going to ultimately do is kind of build the different parts of the plane separately. And then the great thing about layers is that this is all within the illustration layer. I want to slide over here to what I've already done before. Here's that wing I built over here for this demo. Again, I can fill that in. I want to fill it in with that same gray. What you can also do is when you have an item selected, you can choose the fill here, and then change it like that. The other way you can do it is to come over here and hit your I key. Your I key comes up, brings up the eyedropper tool, and you can just say sample that, and you just automatically copy it. So it kind of beats going over to the swatch panel or the fill panel, double clicking on it. You can just kind of work with the keyboards. So we have this kind of plane built here, and what you can a lot of times do is take away the turn off the photo layer and hide it a little bit or not see it, so you can see how the plane's being built. And illustration is again this wonderful thing that you can elaborate and fine-tune details. If you want to straighten out the wing because it looks kind of awkward, that you have the full ability to do. So with layers, within one layer, there are layers within that. So it's kind of like an onion. If you come over here to the illustration layer panel, I'll twirl that down, and then you see all the other parts all stacked up in there in a layer. These are all the various separate paths for building what we see here as a plane. Let me just scroll down here so I can turn off the photo layer so we can see exactly what we're looking at. And you can see I already filled in a background. So I worked on the background, put a shape on there, and put a color. And then within the illustration layer, you can turn off the eyeball for each of the parts, so you can see what part it is. Don't know where that one is yet. Gotta hunt for it. Sometimes you gotta hunt for it a little bit. I have a lot of different little layers here. There it is. There's that wheel. And then there's probably this wheel here. So you can see the different little parts that are drawn. And then what you also learn in this process is that where the layers stack. So if you think about this plane, you would see this wing before you see the fuselage, and then so that means that that's right here. You can inadvertently move things if you need to. Whoops, that's locking it. Pick it up. You can actually move the different parts of the layer stack. I'm going to move it in front of the wing. So as I find it here, I think it might be this one. Behind the wing. So yeah, I just moved it behind the wing, and then see if I can find the other wing. wrong wing. So you can ultimately get a little, in a way, organize your file so you can see it in the proper order. So you can always just move up and down. So with that, let me zoom out so we can see our artboard here. So there's that image right there of the plane. I have the illustration here, and then here's the background, right? See that white little part you couldn't see because when I turn off the background, it's not there, but now you put a background, you can see it. With that, so you have the organization of your layers. And I can put the text layer. Let me turn on the text layer because I did put some text up here. If you were to move the text under the illustration, you don't see that the illustration is on top of the text because they're, the items are separated. If I were to take the illustration or take the text, select that text, and then drag it down here, you see that it appears behind the airplane, as opposed if I switch that around and move the text layer on top above the illustration layer, then you would see the text above the plane. So you're thinking of looking at this as this is the front and working your way back to the background layer. All right. And the other thing that you can do with this illustration is once you get it to a working point, you can have some fun with it. Here's the same illustration, and again, this is always the kind of process of scaling and to see if it's recognizable at a certain scale. I have this object grouped. I'm going to bring a copy over here. And then, again, you can hold the shift key, and then that way it scales in proportion. Sometimes it's really great to see what an illustration looks like on a artboard if it's super big. You can do a lot of cool things with it. So imagine this is a 20 by 30 inch board. This would take up, the airplane would take up the entire 20 inches from left to right, which really give this larger than life impression of the plane. Of course, you can rotate it, coming over here like that. Like that. So then, and then ultimately, you have all these things built, and then you have all these little stacks and layers. So the whole process is just really getting to understanding your layers and where everything gets organized. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Thanks.